The crystal chandeliers of the Bishop family's Chicago estate dripped light onto a scene of almost competitive opulence. It was their annual Thanksgiving charity gala, though it always felt more like a showcase of personal fortunes than actual giving. I, Ava Miller, found my usual spot by the grand fireplace, nursing a sparkling water. Across the room, my cousin Chloe was regaling a circle of admirers with tales of her recent soul-searching trip to Monaco, her diamond bracelet catching the light with every extravagant gesture. Honestly, darlings, you haven't lived until you've summered on the Riviera, she declared, her voice echoing slightly. My other cousin, Jake, was louder, boasting about his new sports car, a custom import, a beast that practically flies off the asphalt. Their voices were a familiar symphony of self-congratulation. Aunt Patricia, ever the matriarch, surveyed her domain with a satisfied glint in her eye, her gaze flicking dismissally over my simple navy dress for a microsecond. Ava, dear, you're so quiet over there, she called out, her tone dripping with fox concern. Still enjoying that quaint little apartment downtown, are we? So brave of you to embrace minimalism in a city like Chicago. I simply smiled. If only they knew the minimalist they pitied was about to redefine their understanding of wealth. My smile remained, a carefully constructed mask. This wasn't a new performance for them, nor for me. A flicker of memory. Me, 10 years younger, excitedly presenting a business proposal for a small tech startup to Uncle Anthony during a family brunch. He'd barely glanced at it, patting my head. That's nice, sweetie. Why don't you focus on finding a nice young man? Jake here just landed a promotion at the firm. You know, his dismissal stung more than any outright insult. Another snapshot. Chloe, at her lavish 25th birthday, unwrapping a designer handbag I'd saved months for. She'd held it up, a confused frown on her face, before quickly tossing it onto a growing pile of more extravagant gifts, muttering something about it being last season to her giggling friends. These small, consistent dismissals had been the bricks in the wall they'd built between us, a wall I was now preparing to dismantle, brick by silent brick. The next morning, the facade of the quaint little apartment gave way to the sweeping city views from my actual residence, a minimalist penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast, a detail conveniently omitted from family conversations. My real life began not with idle chatter, but with purpose. At the sleek, understated offices of Zenith Property Group, a name unknown to the Bishops, my day was already in full swing. Liam Davis, my sharp, ever-composed head of acquisitions, was waiting in my office. Morning, Ava. The preliminary reports on the West Loop residential portfolio are on your desk. We're looking at a potential 15% ROI within 3 years if we move now. He spoke of multi-million-dollar deals with the same calm. I used to order coffee, and the final paperwork for the Sterling Tower acquisition is ready for your signature. Phase 1 of the redevelopment plan can commence as early as next quarter. The Sterling Tower. That was the crown jewel, a historic skyscraper in the heart of the Loop, currently housing several prominent firms, including, ironically, the regional headquarters for Bishop Corp. My phone buzzed then. A restricted number. Miss Miller. A curt voice I recognized as my Uncle Anthony's lawyer. Mr. Bishop requests an urgent consultation regarding new developments at the Sterling Tower. He seems rather distressed. A slow smile touched my lips. The game was truly afoot. Later that week, at a smaller family dinner, ostensibly to discuss Jake's brilliant new marketing idea for Bishop Corp., the conversation inevitably veered back to me. My mother, Susan, bless her heart, wrung her hands slightly. Ava, honey, your Aunt Patricia was just saying, perhaps it's time you considered something more stable? That little design consultancy you do, it's lovely, but her voice trailed off, the unspoken judgment hanging heavy in the air. Chloe chimed in, flipping her perfectly styled hair. Exactly. You're so smart, Ava. Why not leverage that into finding a wealthy husband? Someone who can give you the lifestyle you deserve, instead of, well, you know. She gestured vaguely around my rented, in their minds perfectly respectable, though not ostentatious, downtown apartment where the dinner was being held, a place I chose for its proximity to my actual work. They had no idea. This respectable apartment was a strategic choice, not a limitation. Jake, ever the pragmatist in his own eyes, added, or at least get a corporate job with a clear ladder. All this freelance stuff, it's so unpredictable. I took a slow sip of my wine, a genuine smile playing on my lips this time. Thank You all for your concern, I said, my voice smooth as silk. But I assure you, my current path is proving to be remarkably lucrative and very, very predictable in its success. The first real tremor in the Bishop's gilded world arrived not with a bang, but with a sharply worded email. Uncle Anthony, usually so boisterous at the helm of Bishop Corp, was uncharacteristically pale during an impromptu family brunch a few weeks later. He cleared his throat multiple times, his fork clinking nervously against his porcelain plate. There's a situation with the Sterling Tower, he finally announced, the words heavy. The air in the opulent dining room, usually filled with Chloe's laughter or Jake's boasts, grew thick with an unfamiliar tension. The new owners, some faceless conglomerate, they're playing hardball. Rent hikes across the board, non-negotiable, and they're demanding an immediate review of all existing lease agreements, including ours. This wasn't just an inconvenience. Bishop Corp's prime office space in the Sterling was a cornerstone of their image, their perceived stability. Aunt Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. But darling, your grandfather practically built that relationship with the previous owners. Surely, they can, Patty, and they are, Anthony snapped, a rare display of genuine frustration. And the worst part, we can't even get a proper meeting with these people, just their lawyers, cold as ice. The faceless conglomerate he was referring to? That was Zenith Property Group. My group, back in the serene, sunlit expanse of my Zenith Property Group office. The atmosphere was one of focused control. Liam presented the latest projections for the Sterling Tower's Q1 performance under our new management. The restructured leasing model is already showing a 12% uplift in anticipated revenue, Ava. And that's before the Bishop Corp renegotiation. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. And their request for a meeting with the actual decision makers, I asked, swirling the artisanal tea in my cup. Liam didn't miss a beat, politely declined as instructed. We've reiterated that all communications must go through our legal counsel for now. They're getting agitated. Good. Agitation often preceded clarity. I tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the architectural model of the Sterling Tower, dominating a side table. Liam, I want you to prepare a secondary offer for Bishop Corp. Something that seems like a lifeline, but with conditions so stringent, so tied to performance metrics they've never met, that accepting it would be a slow public unraveling. And if they refuse? Liam queried, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Then, I said, my voice soft but laced with steel, we proceed with the standard market rate eviction process for non-compliant tenants. After all, Zenith has a fiduciary duty to its sole shareholder. That sole shareholder, of course, was me. Days turned into a week of escalating panic within the Bishop household, a stark contrast to the calm precision at Zenith. Uncle Anthony, I heard through my mother's worried calls, was a man unraveling. He'd apparently tried everything, calling in old favors that suddenly weren't being returned, attempting to leverage connections that had mysteriously dried up, even trying to rally other tenants in the Sterling Tower against the new ownership, only to find them either indifferent or already negotiating their own new terms. His desperation was a palpable thing, even relayed seek in hand. Meanwhile, Jake and Chloe remained blissfully, almost offensively, oblivious. I saw Chloe's Instagram story, a video of her laughing poolside at a resort in Scottsdale, captioned, "Escaping the Chicago gloom #spoiled." Jake was overheard loudly complaining at a family dinner, which I'd politely declined, that dad's just overreacting. It's business. Someone will bail us out. They always do. Their naivety was staggering, a testament to a lifetime of unearned privilege. Frustrated and cornered, Anthony apparently made a unilateral decision. He'd fly to New York, to the registered address of Zenith's primary legal firm, and demand to see anyone, with actual authority. A futile gesture, I knew, but a desperate one. Uncle Anthony returned from New York, not with answers, but with a deeper shade of gray etched onto his face. The legal fortress of Zenith had been impenetrable. My mother called me, her voice trembling. "Ava, your uncle. He's calling an emergency Bishop Corp board meeting tomorrow morning. But he also said, he specifically asked for you to be there, as family." An eyebrow on my face. Me? At a Bishop Corp board meeting? This was a first, and a rather transparently desperate one. For years, I was the artistic one, deemed unfit for serious business discussions. Now suddenly, I was family needed in a crisis they couldn't navigate. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. He thinks your connections in the design world might know anyone who can reach these mysterious Sterling Tower owners, Mom stammered, clearly parroting a line she barely believed. Little did she know, the mysterious owner would be sitting right beside her. I agreed to attend, of course, not as the niece with design connections, but as the architect of their impending reckoning. The stage was set. The Bishop Corp Emergency Board meeting convened in their oversized mahogany-lined conference room, a space usually reserved for pronouncements of success, not impending doom. The air was thick enough to choke on. Even Jake and Chloe looked unusually subdued, though Chloe still managed to discreetly check her reflection in her phone screen. My mother sat beside me, fidgeting with her pearls, occasionally shooting me a look that was a mixture of hope and bewilderment. Uncle Anthony, looking 10 years older than he had been a month ago, stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the back of his chair as if for dear life. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice strained. "As you know, Bishop Corp is facing a significant challenge with the new landlords of the Sterling Tower. Our attempts to negotiate, to even understand their position, have been stonewalled." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on me with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher: desperation or a desperate, misguided hope. "We are, to put it bluntly, in a precarious position. Our largest overhead, our very public face, is threatened by an entity that refuses to even show its own." The unspoken question hung in the air. What now? All eyes turned to Uncle Anthony, searching for a miracle he clearly didn't possess. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. Then I cleared my throat, a soft sound that nonetheless cut through the tension like a knife. "Uncle Anthony," I began, my voice even in calm, a stark contrast to the barely concealed panic around me. "Forgive my ignorance, as I'm not usually privy to these high-level discussions, but has anyone considered simply asking the new owners what their long-term vision for the Sterling Tower is?" Jake snorted, a derisive sound. "Right, Ava, like they'd just tell us. These corporate sharks don't do visions, they do hostile takeovers." My mother shot him a warning look, but the sentiment was clear. I continued, undeterred. "Or perhaps has Bishop Corp explored alternative leasing options? Maybe a different building, or even a strategic partnership with a firm that has more leverage in the current market." These were not the questions of the artistic niece. These were the pointed inquiries of a seasoned negotiator. Uncle Anthony looked at me, a flicker of annoyance now mixed with his desperation. "Ava, this is far more complex than your design projects." That was my cue. "Actually, Uncle," I said, my voice still quiet but carrying an undeniable weight, "it's precisely because of my projects that I might be able to offer some insight. You see, the faceless conglomerate you're referring to, the new owners of the Sterling Tower, is Zenith Property Group. And Zenith Property Group, well, it's my company." The silence that followed my statement was so profound, you could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart, or perhaps it was Uncle Anthony's. Every face in the room was a mask of stunned disbelief. Chloe's perfectly glossed lips parted slightly, her phone forgotten in her lap. Jake actually choked on air, a strangled cough escaping him. Aunt Patricia's hand, which had been clutching her pearls, went slack, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on me as if I'd suddenly sprouted a second head. It was Uncle Anthony who broke the spell, a harsh, incredulous laugh erupting from him. "Ava, darling, that's quite the imagination you have. Zenith Property Group, your company? That's a multi-billion-dollar entity. What are you talking about?" He sounded more patronizing than angry, as if humoring a child's outlandish fantasy. "Yes, Ava," Chloe managed, finding her voice, a nervous tremor in it. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe the stress of whatever it is you do is getting to you?" Even my mother looked at me with an expression of deep concern mixed with utter confusion, as if pleading with me to say it was all a joke, a terrible, misguided prank. But my gaze remained steady, my expression unreadable. The denial was expected. The proof was next. I let their disbelief hang in the air for a moment longer, a silent testament to their ingrained underestimation of me. Then, with a calm that unnerved them more than any outburst could. I subtly nodded towards the conference room door. As if on cue, the door opened and Liam Davis, my impeccably dressed head of acquisitions, entered, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He didn't acknowledge anyone but me, his professionalism a stark contrast to the Bishop family's unraveling composure. "You asked me to have these ready, Ava," Liam said, his voice a neutral baritone, as he placed the briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing stacks of neatly bound documents. The full ownership deeds for the Sterling Tower, under Zenith Property Group, and the articles of incorporation for Zenith, listing Ava Miller as sole proprietor and CEO. He slid a copy towards Uncle Anthony, whose hand trembled as he reached for it. The room was deathly silent, broken only by the rustle of papers as Anthony, then Jake, then Evan Aunt Patricia, hesitantly leafed through the undeniable proof. Chloe just stared, her makeup perhaps finally cracking. "As you can see," I stated, my voice cutting through their shock, no longer quiet but resonant with authority. "Zenith Property Group is very much real, and the Sterling Tower is merely one of its more recent acquisitions. Perhaps now we can discuss those lease terms, Uncle? Or would you prefer to talk about Bishop Corp's rather precarious debt-to-equity ratio, details of which are also in my possession?" As Uncle Anthony stared blankly at the damning figures related to Bishop Corp, his face ashen, I allowed a beat of silence before continuing, my tone almost conversational. "Actually, while we're on the subject of Zenith's portfolio," I paused, letting the anticipation build, watching as their eyes, wide with a dawning horror, flicked towards me. "That charming little vineyard in Napa Valley Jake was so excited about last Thanksgiving? The one with the exclusive waiting list." A small, almost unnoticeable tremor went through Jake. "And Chloe, that lovely boutique hotel in Aspen you frequent for your ski trips, the Pinnacle Lodge." Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. "Zenith acquired them both last fiscal year. Quite the coincidences, wouldn't you say?" My smile was serene. Their world, however, was visibly crumbling. The grand conference room, once a symbol of Bishop's power, now felt like a tomb. The weight of my revelations settled upon them, each processing the cataclysm in their own way. Uncle Anthony slumped into his chair, the fight visibly draining from him, his face, a mask of gray disbelief and dawning shame. For the first time, he looked not like a titan of industry, but a broken man. Aunt Patricia was uncharacteristically silent, her manicured hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap, her eyes darting between me and her husband, a maelstrom of confusion, and perhaps a flicker of fear. Jake, after his initial shock, seemed to oscillate between a sullen anger and a bewildered fear. He kept muttering under his breath, "This can't be happening. This isn't real." Chloe, on the other hand, finally broke. Fat tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive mascara, her earlier bravado replaced by a raw, childlike vulnerability. But everything?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The club memberships? The charity boards Aunt Patricia sits on? Even the summer house in the Hamptons?" Her world, built on a foundation of inherited status and acquisitions, was imploding. My mother, Susan, reached out and hesitantly placed a hand on my arm, not in accusation, but with a complex emotion I hadn't seen from her in years. A hesitant, questioning pride. The silence stretched again, heavy with unspoken recriminations and shattered illusions. I let the weight of their collective shock settle, observing them not with triumph, but with a quiet, almost somber scrutiny. This was never about a malicious takedown. It was about a necessary recalibration. "I understand this is a lot to process," I finally said, my voice calm and measured, breaking the oppressive silence. "And I want to be clear. My intention here isn't to destroy, nor is it to gloat." Their eyes, still wide with varying degrees of disbelief and despair, slowly focused on me, searching for a lifeline, or perhaps a trap. I leaned forward slightly. "For years, I've watched the Bishop name a name once synonymous with integrity and community building, according to Grandfather Miller's journals, become something else, something hollowed out by vanity and propped up by unsustainable illusions." I wasn't accusing. I was merely stating a truth they had long ignored. The Sterling Tower, the vineyard, the lodge. These aren't trophies for me. They are assets, yes, but they are also opportunities. Opportunities to build something real, something lasting, something that contributes rather than just consumes. This wasn't the language of a corporate raider. It was the language of a builder, a visionary. And it was a language they were wholly unprepared for. What I did, I continued, my gaze sweeping over each of them, was to remove the safety net you never realized was full of holes. Now, the question is, what will you build without it? The room remained thick with their stunned silence. They looked like shipwrecked sailors, suddenly realizing the island they dismissed as barren was, in fact, the only land in sight. I let them absorb the weight of my question before outlining the new reality. Regarding Bishop Corp's lease at the Sterling Tower, I began, my tone now brisk, businesslike. No more Niseva. This was CEO Miller speaking. Zenith is prepared to offer a new short-term agreement at current, fair market value, naturally, with stringent performance clauses and mandatory transparency in your accounting, a collective intake of breath. Fair market value alone would be a shock to their system, let alone transparency. Alternatively, I continued, placing a slim folder on the table. Liam had anticipated this. Of course, Zenith is also open to discussing an acquisition of certain non-performing assets from Bishop Corp to alleviate your immediate debt burden, provided there's a full, independent audit and a commitment to restructuring from the ground up. This wasn't a rescue. It was an ultimatum wrapped in a business proposal. As for personal matters, my gaze softened fractionally as it met my mother's, then hardened again as it swept over the others, the vineyard, the lodge, other lifestyle assets. Their continued availability to this family will be contingent on a demonstrated commitment to change. Not just words, actions. The choice, unstated but crushingly clear, was theirs: adapt and rebuild with integrity, or fade into a well-deserved obscurity. The weeks that followed were a confusing blur for the bishops. A landscape stripped me of its familiar, opulent landmarks. There were no more extravagant weekend getaways. The chatter at the country club had turned to hushed, speculative whispers. Uncle Anthony, I heard, had actually started spending 12-hour days at Bishop Corp, not schmoozing clients at lunch, but genuinely trying to understand the audit reports Zenith had mandated. He looked perpetually exhausted, but there was a new unfamiliar focus in his eyes. Aunt Patricia, surprisingly, enrolled in a community college business ethics course. A move so out of character it sent ripples of disbelief through their social circle. Chloe, stripped of her usual shopping sprees, was seen volunteering at a downtown soup kitchen, looking lost, but occasionally, a flicker of something like purpose would cross her face when she handed a warm meal to someone truly in need. Jake, however, was the most resistant, still grumbling about unfair tactics and family betrayal, though even his complaints lacked their former arrogant conviction. One evening, my mother hesitantly showed me a text from Jake. Mom, can Ava really help Dad's company? Or is this just a game to her? It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a crack in his wall of denial. A very small, very tentative crack. 6 months later, the annual Bishop Thanksgiving gathering felt different. The opulent Chicago estate was still grand, but the usual undercurrent of competitive boasting had been replaced by a quieter, more genuine sense of connection. Uncle Anthony, leaner and looking more tired but also more content, was animatedly discussing a new community outreach program Bishop Corp had initiated, a condition of Zenith's continued, albeit reduced, financial backing with a group of local business owners I'd invited. No talk of stock prices, only of impact. Aunt Patricia was actually helping my mother in the kitchen, sharing a recipe for pumpkin pie that, surprisingly, didn't involve truffle oil or gold leaf. Chloe, dressed in a stylish but significantly less ostentatious outfit, was showing photos on her phone, not of a new handbag, but of the children at the downtown shelter where she now volunteered twice a week, her smile radiant and unforced. Jake, who had reluctantly taken an entry-level position at a Zenith subsidiary focused on sustainable urban development, was awkwardly but earnestly explaining a green roofing project to Liam Davis, who listened with professional courtesy. It wasn't a perfect picture. There were still occasional flashes of the old egos, but the cracks had let in some much-needed light. They were, slowly, learning to build something new, something, perhaps, real. From a quiet corner, I watched them. My family, so different from the caricatures they once embodied. The journey hadn't been easy for any of us. least of all for them. But the discomfort was a crucible, forging something stronger, something more authentic. My revenge, if one could even call it that, was never about their downfall, but about their potential awakening. True success, I'd learned, wasn't about the height of your skyscrapers, but the strength of the foundations you laid, both in business and in relationships. Liam joined me, handing me a glass of cider. The preliminary designs for the Phoenix Initiative are looking incredible, Eva, he said quietly, referring to Zenith's ambitious new project, transforming neglected urban areas into vibrant, sustainable communities with affordable housing and green spaces. This was the heart of Zenith, the legacy I truly wanted to build, not just acquiring properties, but uplifting lives. Grandfather Miller would have been proud of that one, I think, I murmured, more to myself than to Liam. He wouldn't have cared about the billions. He would have cared about the purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the Bishop Miller name might once again stand for something truly worthwhile. Driving through Chicago later that evening, the lights of the Sterling Tower gleamed against the darkening sky. It was no longer just a monument to commerce, but a symbol of potential, of what could be rebuilt. When ego was replaced by purpose, the Phoenix Initiative was already breaking ground in a forgotten corner of the city, promising new homes and new hope. My phone pinged softly, a message from Chloe, a simple picture of a child smiling drawing from the shelter, captioned, "Made my day." It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about helping them, and others, find a better version of right. True wealth, I realized, wasn't something you hoarded. It was something you circulated, something that grew when shared. Remember, the world might try to label you, to put you in a box based on appearances or assumptions. But your true value is built in silence, in your actions, in the integrity you uphold when no one is watching. Did Ava's story inspire you? If you've ever felt underestimated or built something incredible in silence, share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more empowering stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us create more content like this.